So we decided that we would build upon the successful discussion that we had back in March last year, also in March, where we provoked thoughts and queries on the subject of "This space is not for you." So hold that and do thoughts. Part 2. So we had lots of questions. We had a really good discussion last year. We had lots of questions raised about who owns public space, who uses those public spaces, the sensitive and pertinent subject about violence on women in public spaces, invisibility, visibility, can design change behaviour, loads more things as well were discussed. And to be honest, it was a pretty intense discussion with, and one of our the sister of one of our speakers said that there was a considerable amount of emotional labour spent as well, and I think it was deeply, deeply personal at times. So alongside myself and our lovely speaker Tumpa tonight, we hope that you'll share some thoughts with us via the chat initially, and then hopefully ask the question yourself on camera. So in thinking about tonight's event, we wanted to provoke a response to the same phrase and arouse some sort of effect for you again. Hence the title, "This Space is Not for You, Part 2, followed by the obvious Q&A. So the reason for the repeat title wasn't because we couldn't be asked putting a new title together, but the idea of kind of repeating the title and rethinking about what that space is, or what that space is kind of differently. So we were thinking about the space of practice as opposed to the physical built space, and maybe the space of education rather than public space. Although it depends on what Tumpa says, I might need to edit that out. So what is the space for? Who's invited into the space? Who's excluded within this? Who's included within the space, and then who's excluded from those spaces? I'll just share with you a quick biography that some has already been covered, but so about our lovely speaker tonight, a little biography. So like Praxis, Tumpa's really concerned about challenging inequity and inequality and what I would call systemic injustice and action, but she actions her words and research through teaching at the LSA, London School of Architecture, if you don't know what that is, and Central St Martin's too. So I think we were just talking about its 5th year at LSA and some 2nd and 3rd year at Central. And through her own practice, by being what you would call, I would call as well, an agent of change. She's an architect and the director of her own practice, Our Building Design, and one of the founders, so the kind of core founder of the Fame Collective. So she's going to talk hopefully a little bit about that as well tonight. And the Fame Collective is a group of female architects who share their experiences about positive probably, and negative maybe, but as a positive celebration. But primarily it was started to look and expose and explore and research the barriers that are preventing more women from diverse backgrounds from progressing in the built environment sector. So that's quite a big question to ask, isn't it? And they undertook a survey, I think about 12 months ago, which is a really, really interesting survey. And they've been sharing their research a lot recently. Particularly, I've been seeing loads of it and reposting things through their Instagram accounts, and trying to share it on as many different kind of forms of platforms as possible. Alongside winning awards, so the RIBA Journal Rising Star, woo-woo. Tumpa's also a trustee of the Mannan Foundation Trust too. She's really passionate, and she's a lovely speaker, and likes to kind of, similar to how a lot of us try to work, takes kind of interdisciplinary approaches to design as well, and focuses on the kind of responses architecturally to make change, both to the climate positively, landscape and social practice too. So we hope that you enjoy it. Please put questions into the chats and comments and provocative thoughts. So I'd encourage you to ask. So I'm going to hand you over for "This Space is Not for You" Part 2. I'll hand you over to Tumpa.
Thank you so much, Helen. That was such a wonderful introduction. I think I'll start by sharing my screen. Yeah, can you see my screen? Okay, brilliant. Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me, and apologize for not being able to be here in February due to no internet connection. And thank you so much for inviting me to respond to this really thought-provoking title of This Space Is Not For You, Part 2. And I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm pleased to have met some of the students here in Helen's studio. So in this lecture, I will explore the theme, This Space Is Not For You, from a perspective of a female architect of minority ethnic. The latter part of the lecture will touch on the barriers and the successes of Fame Collective that Helen has mentioned. But first I'll respond to the provocation by exploring the spatial practices. So Helen gave a little bit of introduction, and so the perspective of this lecture is going to be from a practitioner's perspective in architecture. So by exploring spatial practices as an active agent for decolonizing design methods for climate and spatial justice, I will also explore the emancipatory action design research in architectural practice that address inequalities and inequities in the society that we live in. And what I'm going to talk about has been undertaken with the collaboration between my practice, Our Building Design, and the charity I co-founded, Mannan Foundation Trust. And a lot of the research is part of my PhD, and what I'm presenting is part of a number of online journals which you can find. And yeah, please do send me emails if you want more information of any of the things that I share today. And it focuses on the subject of decolonizing design practice in response to climate and social inequalities. And I'm going to discuss some of the research methodologies, some of the tools that I use and co-developed with the communities I work with, and ways of thinking around this subject of architecture having a role to bring about the positive social change. So the term decolonizing in this lecture attempts to offer a framework to re-examine, interrogate, and transform the system in which we practice, architecture and design, and how we teach architecture and design, and through the lens of an educator and a practitioner of architecture, touching on the issues of power, misuse of power, causing inequality, and the role of architecture and design to overcome these issues by empowering marginalized communities or groups. It's a video. Let me see if I can play this video. So decolonizing climate and socially responsive design will explore the methods of design by asking who is allowed to design and who is the design benefiting, and what could decolonizing through the act of design and architecture look like, and how can design disciplines help foster this, spatially, and how do we think about whom architecture is serving. There are certain opportunities to do this as architects, and the focus of this lecture isn't to explore how to decolonize architecture, but through a series of case studies, it suggests methods to decolonize architectural design practice, to facilitate and to understand the climate, the culture, practices of communities, and how they build architecture. So the research is undertaken through the reflection of my own architectural practice and the process, through participation and co-design, through a review of a series of community-focused projects. I'm first going to focus on the projects in the remote village in Rajapur in Bangladesh, exploring the role of a UK-based architect, myself, through an environmental lens, in the context of social, cultural, economic sustainability, insights and insights from ethnographic fieldwork. The Rajapur village is where my father, my late father, Professor Mannan, and that's why our charity is called Mannan Foundation Trust. So Rajapur was where he was born. And my journey to Rajapur was an attempt to reconnect with my roots in Bangladesh after being brought up in the UK and after graduating, after finishing my part 3 in 2011, when I wanted to just, do something completely different. And in 2011, my initial participation included engaging with the communities by volunteering to teach English in the local village primary school, an interaction which aided me to build a relationship with the community, to develop the brief of our first building project, which is the Rajapur Center, the Women's Literacy and Community Healthcare Center. So just a bit of a background about where Bangladesh is in the context of the world. So Bangladesh is in Southeast Asia, and it borders with India and a bit with Myanmar, and the capital city is Dhaka, and it also has borders, it's close proximity to the Himalayas, and that plays a big role in the projects I'm going to share with you because of the ice melting due to climate change and how it affects the village in Rajapur, the village Rajapur that I'm going to talk you through the projects that we work. So Bangladesh is most vulnerable to the changing climate due to its shifting riparian characteristics. So it's a land of many rivers, and the main 3 rivers have a confluence here, which is near the village, and that's where it experiences extreme weather conditions. It is situated in the Bengal Delta, which has a moving territory between land and the sea on the southern borders of the country, where sea level is rising, and from the northern borders of the country, freshwater rivers born out of the Himalayas of the Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers converges with the Meghna River, are constantly depositing their silt mixed with the saline water from the Bay of Bengal. The rivers are constantly eroding, depositing, sedimenting, compacting, contracting, evaporating, etc. These are some of the vocabulary and the words that really play a big role in the research that I've been undertaking, causing the shift in the sand and the silt and the ground, and causes loss of land and also gain of land. So the global warming causing an increased level of ice melting in the Himalayas exacerbates the shifting of landscape between the water and the land in the periodic flooding, and the riparian areas are most vulnerable to this shifting landscape as its inhabitants face the changing climate head on. These floodplains created by shifting of the sediments and silts deposited by the rivers and the basis of the productive of ecosystem. So it has a sort of double-edged sword, if you like. So on the one hand, people suffer from the flooding, but on the other hand, this flooding causes the ecosystem to be highly productive in terms of growing crops such as rice and other agricultural practices. So dependent on the rich nutrient present in the silt shifted by the rivers, this is so this is a very simplified explanation of a complex system called the monsoon and the landscape of Bangladesh. The context of the research addresses issues of these extreme changing climate conditions and the community's adaptations in the Rajapur village. So initially, I'm going to quickly discuss what are the areas of adaptations and what are the strategies that the communities of rural areas of Bangladesh are practicing. So we've learned from these communities called Char communities, and Char is basically it's an island which is a temporary island, and it has a life of 5 to 10 years. And it kind of appears because of this shifting landscape. And there are communities who learn to live in these islands knowing how to use the ecosystem to their advantages, and they learn how to adapt strategies to grow plants on water using completely natural materials, and also farming happens on water. So these are some of our dissemination. So, you know, what role does an architect play in this in terms of dissemination? So I'm just going to increase this. I think some of the drawings are cropping. So some of the drawings as designers can really help to disseminate these important, you know, the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge that are present and can be shared across different communities. Yeah, so there's an example of adaptations through floating cage in fishing, through flooding, and how fishing is done in flooding season. So these are my initial photographs when I first visited the village in 2011. And since then, the last 10 years, the conditions, the landscape, the climate have changed significantly because that's what the landscape is like. It faces changes in cycles of 3 to 5 years. So as I mentioned earlier, my ethnographic methodology facilitated the understanding of what the social and cultural factors and expectations are needed to be considered when exploring co-design strategies. So in this slide, it's just some of the slides of my initial community engagement and how I basically got to know the community through volunteering in the school. To gain ethnographic understanding of the community, its cultural practice, its surrounding landscape and changing climate, I began to interact and develop this relationship with the community, and by participation, my own participation in the daily lives and of the community. So yeah, and through this I've learned that there is a lack of access to education and healthcare, and there's a struggle for the community, and it exacerbates if you're a female. So, for example, this little girl who was my student at the time, at the age of 11, her education had stopped because although there's a primary school in the village, the secondary school is quite far away from the village, and her parents felt it wasn't safe for her to travel to another village to go to school, whereas the boys are able to carry on. And education is not free in Bangladesh, and healthcare isn't as well. So there is a lack of access to healthcare and education. And also in terms of the built environment, I've listened to the villagers' stories of these annual cultural practices. For example, in the middle, you can see these annual ritual of plastering the mud floors of the houses that the women are engaged in, and the nature. So basically collecting the information formally and also informally of community engagement and discussions really helped me gather understanding of, you know, how people build and what materials they engage in terms of building their own houses. So the nature of the research and collecting information makes the boundaries around ethnography and other sorts of qualitative inquiry. Okay, so the next few slides, I'll attempt to review the co-design methods through the building project Radhapur Women's Literacy and Community Healthcare Centre. This is a long-term commitment project that has been set up by the Mannan Foundation Trust, and the aim was to empower communities, especially the marginalized members of the community, the women, and it reviews the methods of decolonizing architectural practice by redistributing power and power dynamics between gender and class and income. So, very initial investigation about the village started off with very informal mapping, although these are my own mapping diagrams, which I have produced after I've acquired the knowledge through the community engagement. And the map of remote places in Bangladesh is not accessible. The maps that, these maps don't exist, basically. The ones that do exist are from colonial times, which only indicate the legal boundaries of land ownership and do not reflect the conditions of the landscape. So we had to find different kinds of maps. These maps have been produced through a particular tool called Transect Walk with the community members. It is a very useful tool that helps you to get to know neighborhood and to understand the water resources, the waste water flow, the sanitation facilities, which help the communities assess the problems and the opportunities in the neighborhood. So we walked with the community participants who know the area well, and together we drew outlines of the houses and the walkways and the rainwater collecting pools. So all the blue areas they're called pukur, which are basically excavated by the community strategically in the village to collect rainwater in the monsoon season. With a simple line on one large piece of paper, we gathered this information, and they collectively agreed on symbols to represent things which are important to the community, such as water, infrastructure, and areas which are causing problems. So these participatory maps were an important way to understand the neighborhood through the eye of the community, to document what is important and what they perceive to be a problem in the community and in their lives. So so I would say this is a valuable tool for community engagement and to see the entanglement between the climate, the human and non-human agencies. So just to quickly explain, so that's the main road, and these are paths that go into the village that you can access by walking or through rickshaws. And then this is the community hub where you have the Rajapur Primary School, where I initially, worked, volunteered. And then there's a mosque here. So the community building that we built, this was the best place to build it because it's within the hub. And the green areas are the bamboos where we've basically sourced the bamboo to build the building. Later on, I'll come on to that. So initially, we started off with formal design meetings with the community, and we realized that they were dominated by village elders who happened to be men, and the women didn't really engage in this way or didn't have a say, or it wasn't the right social practice to speak in these meetings. We also tried to communicate through architectural drawings, but it was something that hindered participation. We felt that people didn't really understand plans. So one way we try to overcome that is by having these drawing workshops with the village children and their parents, basically. So in that way, we could enable both the adults and the children to voice what they think the design should be and tell their stories of, what's their ideal community building. We also built small models to basically communicate spaces. And the other really important tool, method that we've used was improvising these performance, kind of basically performing relationship with the site, and also to understand the etiquette of using public space by acting it out on site and having ropes to draw it in 3D on site. So we were really, really keen to use bamboo, and there is a small number of people in the village who have very good knowledge and skills to use bamboo. And we wanted to have workshops that shared that knowledge, that exchanged that knowledge. But there was a stigma in the village that bamboo is it's not long lasting. So we held many workshops where we exchanged the knowledge of how to treat the bamboo. But I can talk about this a bit more in the discussion later, but it becomes quite hierarchical what material you use in the village, because it's seen to be a material for from the past, and the whole colonial thought of following the West and using concrete is something that the village elders really pushed for. But we wanted to use the skills that were really embedded in the community. And one of those was the building with earth. And the women are excellent in building with earth in the village, because they build their own kitchen and their outhouse that they have. And we hosted these workshops to learn from the women how to basically design walls and design blocks with earth, and what's the right mix would be. But we came across problems in the sense that women did not want to publicly engage in the site. So we hosted these workshops in their courtyard, and we learned from them, and we came up with a system where they would build these blocks in their homes and would transport them, walk with them to the site, because it's very close, and use them for the building. And these are some of our drawings on our feet. We had to come up with, think on our feet and think ways that we could communicate design with the community. And these are post-completion drawings. So after the building was completed, these are some of the drawings I produced to document the design, because some of the design happened as we built. So it's in a ditch in one of those rainwater collecting pools, and it's been lifted up from the ground. We didn't want to fill the pool because we wanted to still preserve the ecology beneath the building. And it has a concrete plinth, and above that it has perforated walls with earth blocks and bamboo, and the main frame is bamboo frame. And it also, we were told to have flexible dividers in the big space in the community hall to basically respect some of the segregation that might be required between men and women and how they use the space in a gathering. Okay, so yeah, so the elevations were very much dependent on where, which direction the cyclone was which direction the building was facing in relationship with the cyclone and the flooding. So yes, it kind of evolved in that way. And the building really takes benefit from the evaporative cooling, because the pool from below, and there's no electricity for this building, so it relies on natural daylight and natural ventilation. So yes, these are some of our photographs of when the building was being built, with various aspects of bamboo and earth block. And this is when it was completed. So we have these pockets of spaces where the sun rotates around and sculpts the shadows and the light in a beautiful way. And it's a cooling space, because the perforation through the wall and enables the cool air from below. And it's used for free health camps and also the women's literacy and income generating classes at the moment. And it's very much loved by especially the women in the community, because this is the first free, safe space for women in the village in Radhapur and the villages surrounding Radhapur. So they feel it's their own, and somewhere they can come and exchange their knowledge and share their worries. And we've had visits from architecture schools from Bangladesh with nearby. So yeah, so this is my favorite slide actually, because this celebrates the first cohort of women who graduated from the center, from the income generating course that we host, and we've had 5 cohorts so far. And this is a lady who graduated from this center and started her own business, started her own income, source of income, where she learned ways to design and make dresses, and she sells them in the village. So just to summarize the process and the methods, some of the methods that I discussed, and the ways that methods of decolonizing and thinking of how to engage in a building project. I try to summarize this through my own understanding, ethnographic learning from the site with the community of what happens in the site and how, how sensitive it is to the climate change and the season, basically, and ways that we interacted in terms of design practice, and spatial design. So let me just quickly, and then, these are different stages of what the building went through. It took 3 years to build this building because of you had to be sensitive to the season, but we, were able to use the platform first, and then the rest of the building went up in the 2 years after that. So post occupancy, and these are some of the meetings where we could evaluate how beneficial the building is. And so although it's loved by the women, and it's very much used by the women, the men, they access the building through the health camps that we provide. However, we've had complaints, or I would say, people showing they're not quite happy because they want the same kind of opportunities that the women are having at the moment, which for us is quite difficult because women are so deprived. So there's no way you could achieve you can give equal opportunity in this building when there are opportunities exist for men elsewhere, and it doesn't for women. So it's still a conversation we're having with the community, where we are trying to think of internship and courses for men as well. So but we wanted to understand the different voices of the community, and one of them was the children and also the men and women, and how they use the space and what they would like to see change or want things done differently. And we then also talked a lot about the community need in terms of climate change, in terms of different issues with the climate, and what we could do as a trust to address some of the issues together with and best way to do that was to have these skill sharing workshops and storytelling of some of the cultural practices that people use to adapt to climate change. And women tend to be if you like, the bearer of this burden, because men of working age they tend to be either in the cities working or abroad. So it's the women who are looking after their families, and men tend to be either really old or quite young, and the middle kind of age range, they come back to the city, come back to the village seasonally. So it was very important for us to work with the women, and one of this project looks at water and how we could use the extreme humidity in Rajapur village to collect fog in droughts and in extreme weather condition when it's not raining as much in Rajapur, and how they could use it for cultivating their fields. So these next, quickly I'm going to go through these ones. After COVID happened, we couldn't go to Rajapur since 2019. We haven't been able to go back. However, it's actually given us a huge opportunity to find those talented champions, if you like, community champions, who worked with us to address the issues of COVID-19. And one of them was the imam, who is the priest, if you like, of the mosque. And he had a mic, so his voice was the loudest, if you like, literally. So we worked with him very closely to disseminate the information about how to keep the community safe. Although Bangladesh government was doing that, but it takes a long time to reach remote villages like Rajapur. So we were faster in this way. We also did a lot of promotional videos to help people to keep safe in terms of hand wash and social distancing and wearing a mask. But we realized it's only the young youth and the elder men that had those phones, with data that would enable that kind of dissemination. Women only had really old Nokia phones. So we had to really come up with another way, which was to go and speak to them face to face, door to door, and disseminate the information. We also hosted in the Rajapur Centre lots of workshops in terms of keeping safe, hand washing workshops. And the school was closed for more than nearly 2 years. And so we had a lot of workshops with the children to participate and understand through design and learning the rules of keeping safe in COVID-19. And these are some of the design workshops they did to learn about social distancing, and they designed and made their own kind of apparatus to demonstrate the spatial distance that they need. And then also we had mask workshops, and there's a lot of talent in the village to make their own ways of keeping safe. So quickly,
Tumpa, can we try and I'm just trying to kind of keep an eye on the time so that we can get some questions in as well.
Yeah, so shall I go straight to the fame stuff?
Because I think that can be one of my questions, is to ask you about the amazing work of fame as well. Okay, I know you could probably talk for hours about this, I think, couldn't you?
Yeah.
No, you can feel the passion as well. But I think there'll be some questions about fame as well that I think will come out.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Questions in the chat.
Yes, sure. I will go straight to.
Sorry.
No worries. No, it's a good point. I think it'll be more interesting to have a discussion. So Helen did a really good introduction of Fame Collective already, but it stands for Female Architects of Minority Ethnic, and it also really celebrates the successes of underrepresented female in the architecture and the built environment. It's a research network, and we are currently working on a research project that is exposing the barriers in architecture through lived experiences of discrimination of race and gender in architecture education and architecture in practices and in academia. And it's also an expression of solidarity, finding a grounding with people who share this, the same sort of struggle as myself. And so I'm just going to 2 more slides. I'll just quickly show you the highlights of our recent exploration. So as well as collecting the stories of discrimination, we've also looked at data, which so we could review, what is the landscape in terms of race and gender and ethnicity and within architecture. So these are data that was published from the ARB, recent data that we found, of what it looks like in architecture. So, it's heavily dominated by people who are white, and then it kind of diminishes as in different ethnicity. And this is about students. And it's very interesting to see this, because it seems like if you are white, the number of Part 1 students, the number of Part 3 students, it kind of increases. So there's more white people graduating in architecture. But if you are Asian, Asian students have the highest dropout and attrition rates from Part 1 to Part 3, and then the Black and also the other ethnic minorities. So it's really good to show this, because it shows the lack of representation in architecture in terms of the diversity of the communities that we live with and the communities that we serve as architects. I'm going to stop by sharing this 1-minute video with you from our recent Fame Collective Research Symposium. And these are the words by Marsha, who's the Diversity and Equality Director of RIBA. And it's really powerful. That's why I think it'd be a good place to end. Oh, sorry, you can't hear this, can you? Okay, I'll stop sharing and reshare, if that's okay. Share sound. Yeah, that's it. I can do that now. Sorry.
Because then how else do we know that there's an injustice to fight? And this is it. Work. There may not be any intention on the part of those who allow these outcomes to transpire, and yet, here it is. The evidence, the outcomes, the impact. And it's beholden upon us all in the profession, the ARB as a statutory organisation and the RIB as a professional body, to work together with all to tackle it. It's all well and good acknowledging and saying, yes, yes, but these figures lay bare the reality in people's lives. And whilst it may feel personal to them when this research is laid at the feet of those in charge, it's not so personal to them. Those in charge can afford to step back, work through any bias, defensiveness, and discomfort, and take this data, showing systemic discrimination and the stories of personal woe, and run with it to create change, remembering it is personal for those who are...
Yeah, that's the end of my presentation. I think it's a good place to end. I'll stop sharing. Sorry.
Great, thank you. I could have carried on listening and listening and listening there, actually. But thanks very much for just sharing like your really personal connection with Bangladesh as well, which must have been just a really fabulous opportunity, but actually really passionately shared and talked about as well. I think the things that have come into my head as part of that thought process was, a lot of it was about methods of ownership, methods of kind of sharing, methods of practice, methods of learning, reflection that you were going through, and I think also really tally nicely with the FAME work as well. So my question, just as a kickstart, because there are some questions in the chat as well, which look really interesting, is if you could just tell us a little bit more about the kind of the outputs, the outcomes rather, of the work with FAME, because it was just a little bit kind of cut short through to from the riches of the project in Bangladesh.
Yes. So there is a video that's we're sharing at the moment, which just basically shows a snapshot or highlights of the stories that we've collected, especially from students of FAME students and students who already graduated and suffered discrimination in architecture education. And so our FAME research looks at three strands. So one is the lived experiences in practices and as practitioners, and the other one is in pedagogy and in terms of being a student, in terms of learning what kind of barriers FAME students would face because of their gender or because of their race or socioeconomic background. And the third one is, which we're working on currently, is actually looking at the successes and how to navigate around the issues that some of us already have faced, and how we've done that to help those who are coming into the profession or help those who are considering studying architecture. So yeah, it's very much work in progress still, the research, but we try to share the work as we go along, because we find that it really help those and encourage those to speak out, to share their barriers, because if we don't share them, if we don't expose them, it's people won't know about them, and that's the only way we can make change happen, by talking about it, by keep talking about it. Because Matrix, the women's feminist group, started 40 years before FAME, and we still needed FAME, we still needed a feminine group to and it's ongoing, our struggle is ongoing. And there's still room for new groups to come up and act in solidarity, to be together and show solidarity and expose the problems that we're facing, and to really address the underrepresentation of women of color or men of color, and and race and gender and socioeconomic people from background who are not as privileged. So really to address the issue of architecture being for the elite, we really need to address that as well. So yeah, there's lots of kind of layers and layers of issues that we are coming across through these stories that people are telling us.
I think it's absolutely critical that we have the space and both the safe space and also the provocative space to have those conversations. I completely agree, but I think we need to take action to make change as well, don't we? Which is absolutely critical as part of that discourse, whether it's inside the safe space or outside the safe space, because architectural education still lacks diversity, both from the deliverers of the education and the students within the education. I guess I think I've got loads of questions, but I'm not going to ask them because there's some really interesting questions in the chat, and Colin will actually start to give me daggers if I don't let him take over now. So I might come back to the questions after we've finished.
Sure.
I'm going to hand over to Colin. Sorry.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tumpa, for your amazing talk. First, I would like to ask Nadir to ask their question. If you could please turn on your camera and mic to ask your question.
Hi. Basically, my question was, do you think the spaces that you created would be used more if they were just exclusively for women? And I think you did touch on that and how gender segregation sort of was a possibility and something that you looked into. But yeah, by making it sort of exclusive for women, would it make it more likely for them to use them?
Thanks, Nadir. Nice to see you again.
Yeah,
it is okay. So yes, it isn't exclusive for women. It's true, but we have exclusive days for women in the village. So, for example, Fridays it's the weekend in Bangladesh, and Fridays are for women. And the reason for not making it absolutely exclusive throughout the whole week and through the whole year is because it's also a place where we host the health camps for the community, and that's for everybody in the village. So and also I think to get people's buy-in, you have to sometimes, well, this is my own opinion. I mean, it doesn't, no one has to listen to this or follow this, but I found when I was working with the community that even those who have privilege, if you don't listen to them, it just seems like you're not being fair. And so in some ways you have to navigate around that by giving them access as well, but obviously at the same time making sure those who have no access to any free space in the public space get the most access or exclusive access in some days of the week. So that's how we try to play that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So you've just basically split it, sort of giving them access, because there's this huge thing, especially in South Asian culture, where if a space is, especially in more traditional sort of societies, that gender segregation is just huge. And if sort of even just gatherings are mixed, it sort of makes it less likely for people to come, even here in the UK, in our communities. So yeah, no, so it's cool that that's sort of being recognised and it's being split that way for everyone to have access.
Yeah, but you'd be surprised when we have visiting doctors, because access to healthcare is so scarce. There is no discrimination. Men, women, they'll be standing in queue together, like eager to see the doctor. So there is no segregation then. No one cares that time. They all change into a different mode that they need to see the doctor.
That's us, yeah.
Yeah.
The line is drawn in certain places, but not in others.
Yeah.
Healthcare.
Yeah.
Great question.
Thank you very much for your question. I'll move on to Hetty's question. I think, no. Yeah, I'll ask the question. So the question was, so yeah, I'm interested in how these communities are financially impacted by the frequency of crises due to climate change. A lot of issues can be exacerbated by the lack of money, which is compounded when crises hit. So how can the power be redistributed when it is so easily controlled by those who have the money?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, so I tried to explain in my presentation that the climate is not always predictable, and yeah, so when there are issues with extreme weather conditions, and so they, sometimes the village would lose its crops, or they would lose all the investment they have put towards fish farming, and it didn't come to fruition. So what do they do? What happens? And I think this is why the men, majority of the men of working age are now faced to go to cities or abroad. And this is why we work with the women more, because it's the women who are left supporting the family and supporting, coming up with adaptation strategies to face the burden of climate change. And yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer about finances and how it could be redistributed, but I know that, there are other charities working in the village, and also the government, they do have schemes, like seasonal schemes, to help farmers when they suffer from extreme weather conditions. But in terms of what the power that we have in the small charity that we've set up, we try very hard to have workshops that exchange knowledge of those who already come up with adaptation strategies using their skills. So it's shared and it's exchanged, so others can also take benefit from that. So yeah, so we kind of facilitate that discussion. We try to facilitate those workshops of skill sharing and exchanging knowledge of adaptations in climate change.
Perfect, thank you very much. And building up on that idea of skill sharing, I also had a question. So I didn't quite catch it. You said that you used a specific term when you were mapping those places. You said something walk. What was it?
Transect walk. So let me type it.
Yes, please. And yeah, that was one thing, one part of the question, but the other part was, so could you please expand a bit on how you used it to map the environment and the place, and maybe how the community help you with it, based on saying that you want to share these skills with them as well?
Yes, I know I shouldn't be sharing my screen when I'm talking, but there was a map that was done by the community which I didn't get to show, and I think it would really help to answer that question. So for example, if you don't mind, if I could quickly share that. So this is one of the maps. So these are the kind of maps that we did together through the Transect Walk. This was done recently. This is for another project that we're looking at groundwater, arsenic poisoning in groundwater in the village. But so the way it works, the way I think the community share their knowledge of their village is they always orientate themselves from the community hub, so which I mentioned, the mosque and the primary school, and this is the Rajapur Center that we built. And then if you like, this is the hub, and then they kind of imagine walking and what path they'll be drawing lines to represent paths and the houses that are on either side. So that's then been translated into my scaled drawings that I did later on. So yeah, so this is a kind of an example of the kind of co-created map that we did, mapping diagrams that we worked on.
Perfect. Thank you very much for clearing that out. And also, Leslie, Emily had some thoughts and also very few questions. Emily, could you please ask them?
I'm sorry, I didn't really ask a question. I just was really inspired by the methods that you were using. I'm always really interested in the way people talk to people about design and the different tools they use. That's something that really interests me. So I really liked hearing about the transect walk. I've just looked up, there's some references, so I'll be having a look at that. But I guess just of the project itself, have you published anything about the kind of the process yet, or is that in development because it's kind of your PhD, I guess?
Yes and no. I mean, I've written a chapter in a book for the research project called Monsoon Assemblages, and the book is Ground, and there's a chapter there that I had written about the ground of Rajapur village, and it talks about the methods and tools, a touch on those. And then there are a few publications, online publications as well. I can send the links to Helen later on to share if people are interested. Okay, good. Because the book is free. You can access it online, the book as well.
Can I ask another question while I'm here? Sorry, Colin. I guess I just want to know what's in the future for FAME. What are your plans and how are you going to use the data? And I don't know, is there kind of, what's next, I guess?
Yeah, I mean,
she's read my question. That was one of my questions.
I do often think about that. I often think, is this all a waste of time? Is anything going to happen? But I try to be positive. But so we have, I applied for RIBA Research Fund. So we're working through the submissions for that. So that's a 2-year-long project, and it ends in 2023, January, February 2023, and which basically documents, all the stories that we found, as well as the data, and we analyze it. And again, there is going to be a chapter in that book. It's going to be in the form of a book at the end, which has where we profile the women like Pooja, who was your last speaker for this series, and how they've navigated around the barriers that they might have faced and celebrate their successes. So we hope to share that. That should be free to access from the RIBA website. And then beyond that, I think, we're going to carry on with this networking, standing in solidarity, having a platform to voice, share a voice of those who have the quiet voices in architecture, I call them. But at the same time, there's lots of little strands of things that I have in my mind, what I'd like to, how I would like to FAME to take forward. For example, we've been approached by, because we're working in Whitechapel this year with Central St. Martin's, my studio, and we've been approached by this community group is run by women, and they are very much interested in us hosting design architectural workshops for girls between the age of 16 to 19 who ordinarily they don't have a good enough portfolio to apply for architecture. So FAME could really help to help create an opportunity for design workshops to help people enter the education of architecture. And currently they don't have the facilities because arts funds have been cut so badly in schools. They don't have good enough portfolios to enter architecture school. So we want to come in and help before stage 0, if you like, before part 1. So there are some ideas, but if you guys have any ideas and if you'd like to collaborate and join us,
oh yes,
please do.
Starting a foundation year on exactly that agenda that Emily is leading.
I mean, I might just invite you to come and talk to our foundation students.
No, we should.
Oh, fantastic!
It's the first lecture. Got that now, Nail. Sorry, Colin.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Actually, there's one more question from Nadir. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, I just had another question. So it was great seeing women actually constructing these spaces and creating these materials. Is that sort of common in Rajapur, or was that something that you were sort of encouraging?
It's common and not common at the same time. So the main house that the families live in are usually built by, it depends how much money you have, usually built by the men of the family, and the women are responsible for the outhouses, and they build those with their bare hands and with mud earth constructions. But if you have a lot of money, and most people who actually attended the meeting, they have money from their son working in Saudi Arabia or somewhere, and they tend to want to build with manufactured brick and concrete. So their houses are just like you would have in a house in a city, which was something very difficult for us to navigate around, because they didn't want to support us building a community building, which for them it seems like using using materials which don't have as much value in their eyes, because I guess it's that, I mentioned that before, is that idea of having a Western way of building which isn't suitable for this very indigenous natural environment where it's so humid and so hot. So it depends who the house is for and how it kind of shapes how it's built. So but if you are on a low income and you have a low budget, then you tend to build with your hand, with bamboo, with earth, and we wanted to celebrate those skills. That's something, I also push for that because of that, the fact that so those who are not well known in the village with those skills, they're amplified, their skills are amplified, and so it stands as an example what could happen with these materials.
Perfect, thank you.
Perfect, thank you very much. I think those were all the questions that I could gather from the chat. So let's move on to Helen. If you have any last questions, I want to end with something, Helen.
I don't think I'm going to ask any more questions because I think I've got too many, but I think I've just got some closing thoughts in a way, because it's something that we're trying to explore a lot more within the atelier about different forms of technology and different approaches to technology that are based and connected to equity and inequity. And I think what's been really interesting, based on a really small, I know it lasted over a few years, but a really tiny little constructed project, which is very beautiful as well, is that we've touched upon gender. I might have missed a few things here. We've touched on gender inequity / equity, material politics, climate change, social, environmental and economic injustice, construction methodology, methodologies of working for practice, ownership, sharing, all sorts of different methodologies, hidden voices, having a voice now, health inequalities. I think that was, I wrote that down as we were going along. So they're the kind of subjects of all the kind of technology questions that we're asking as well. So it was kind of lovely to see that, in one project, and you just kind of get excited about what the other projects are, which is why Emily's question about what's next was really lovely as well. She stole my thunder. But yeah, I guess I'm reflecting a little bit myself and thinking, actually, rather than this space is not for you, I think for me tonight, I think that building was absolutely for you, or that space is for you as a community. And I'm rephrasing it slightly to conclude, because I do think that you managed to achieve so much with just such a tiny, probably very, very low budget, if any budget at all, construction process and methodology, and it was really delightful hearing you. I could have carried on all evening, sorry. I love projects like that. Yes,
thanks so much.
You're absolutely welcome, but thank you everybody as well. And I kind of, like, all the people that haven't been here today, they've missed out, I do feel. So I think in the normal way, we often clap at the end of a session. So thank you very much. If everybody would like to offer a round of applause. Is there anything that the MSA Thursdays team need to say at the end? It's the last one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the last one. So thank you so much for coming. I think it's actually a nice end to the series this year, very intimate, and then with the really nice familiar faces and absolutely explosive talk by Tumpa. So thank you so much. And then just to say that we have a pretty explosive lineup next year, so watch this space. We're gonna start with a big bang, so just wait for it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for inviting me, Helen.